Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
Welcome back. Joining me now is Lyn Ulbricht, and she is the mother of Ross Ulbricht. You may remember his name with the Silk Road website. He has been convicted as the creator and operator of Silk Road and been given a life sentence. Now, I want to say one thing right up front. Of course, this involves the war on drugs, as the federal government is coming after Silk Road for selling, among other things, allowing on his website drugs to be sold and other things, some of which were legal, some of which were not legal. It was a dark website. But I want to say, first of all, for many people there who think that the war on drugs is the way that we should control abuse of drugs, understand that we've been doing this now for, 45 years since Richard Nixon declared the war on drugs. It hasn't had any effect on abuse. So it's a total failure from that aspect. Understand also that 10 years before Richard Nixon enacted and declared the war on drugs, the 4 schedules that we now file all the drugs under, that was created by the UN. We are enacting a UN agenda to the letter. These 4 schedules of drugs, the population of all the drugs into these 4 schedules is something that the UN created. If you're conservative and you don't like drugs and you're afraid of drugs and you want to enable the government to use a hammer to try to stop this problem, think about those 2 things there. Think about how it has corrupted our law enforcement system. That's one of the key things we're going to be talking to Lyn Ulbricht about. Think about the fact that we've imprisoned a greater number of people in our society than any society in history. Greater than the Chinese Communist Society, greater than the number of people that were imprisoned by Stalin under his regime. This, however, has been a bonanza for organized crime. It has been a bonanza for the police state. And quite frankly, it is difficult to separate organized crime from the police state. And that's one of the things that we want to talk about is the people that were investigating Silk Road and who have now been charged with issues. But where do you want to start with this, Lyn? We've got people, as you were telling me before we began the interview, Ross got a life sentence.
Double life.
Double life
plus
sentence.
40 years for good measure.
Wow.
Yeah.
And yet the people who were actually selling drugs, tell us about what they got.
The top drug dealer who was convicted for being the top drug dealer got 10 years. The person convicted for being the top cocaine and heroin dealer on Silk Road, 5 years.
Wow.
Just today I read that the top admin of Silk Road 2 is looking at 8 years.
Wow. And then we've got the government agents who are running the investigation.
6 and 7 years.
Yeah. And one of them was convicted of $800,000 that he embezzled. And he was with the Secret Service. That was Sean Bridges. Carl Force with the DEA was also convicted and imprisoned. And then this is an article that goes back to February this year. Now, Sean Bridges was a former Secret Service agent. He was part of the team that investigated Silk Road, and we'll talk about that too, because that really tainted the investigation. He was newly arrested in February at his home the day before he was scheduled to hand himself in to begin his prison sentence. And according to court documents, officers found bags containing his passport, a notarized copy of his passport, as well as corporate records for 3 offshore entities. Mm-hmm. So tell us about that. They would not allow the defense team to tell the jury about these corrupt officers, and they knew about this before the trial occurred.
Absolutely. And I just want to say something to what you said before, which is I'm not for drugs either. Mm-hmm. You know, I would recommend don't do them, okay? But the drug war is not really about drugs, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And if they were, it doesn't work. So they would think of something else. And I think it's more about government expansion and intrusion.
That's right. They've used this as a technique. Yeah. And of course, we've reported many times about how the production of opium in Afghanistan had been taken down to only about 10% of the world's supply until we took over Afghanistan. And now it's up to nearly 100% of the world's supply, a record crop every year that we see there. And of course, they use that just like they used the bringing in the crack cocaine epidemic from Central and South America. They use that to fund their secret wars, but they also use it to expand the police state and the surveillance state. And so there's a key thing that we're going to talk about this as well, and that is the political considerations, the legal considerations of general warrants. But before we get into all that, let's talk about these particular agents and what happened at the trial that should concern people about how they shut down the information to the jury.
Right. Well, the fact that these agents they knew that they were stealing from the site. They knew that they had high-level administrative access. They had basically the keys to the kingdom, and we talked about that in our last interview. They could change passwords, PIN numbers, commandeer accounts. They could act as DPR. They had all kinds of aliases. They could do pretty much what they wanted, change chats.
They could set up somebody as a patsy.
Totally could.
Yeah.
They could do pretty much what they wanted to do, and they had the motive to do that because they were stealing over $1 million over here. This was not allowed to be known to the jury. This is a direct violation of the Brady Rule, which says it is illegal not to let all exculpatory evidence favorable to a defendant be known to a jury. And yet the court allowed the prosecution's argument, and the jury had no idea about these guys. And it only came out 2 months later. I think,
and this is what we see over and over again, whether it's the war on drugs or whether it's
an epidemic.
The war on terror. The government continually comes in and says, we have this objective, whether it's to keep us safe from drugs or to keep us safe from terror. And to achieve this objective, we're going to set aside the law. We're going to set aside the procedure, and we're just going to ram this through because that gets in our way.
Yeah. And I very much wonder, and I think the prosecution thought that if the jury had known about these corrupt agents, it would have cast reasonable doubt on the evidence that they were being presented with and the guilt of the defendant, Ross. And they were not going to let that be known. It was they fought tooth and nail.
And I think one of the things that is really going to be necessary for us to get our freedoms back, because the system, I believe, is so corrupt in Washington, it doesn't matter who we elect as president, because we have these bureaucracies that are essentially writing the laws, have their own police forces, have in many cases their own courts, but they're writing roughshod over the Constitution and our legal system. I don't think we're going to be able to shut this down unless we do it at the local level with jury nullification. Now, there were some people at your son's trial that were trying to inform the jury about jury nullification in a generalized way. Tell us what happened there.
They were handing out pamphlets, and there were some signs around the courthouse informing jurors of their rights. And the judge said if they didn't leave by the next day, she would sequester the jury. And the thing is, that's usually reserved for mafia bosses and violent people who are threatening a jury. And so that casts that kind of
for their
call.
protection, yeah.
Yeah,
but
for
in
their
this
protection.
case, they're trying to keep the jury from seeing something.
Protect them from pamphlets.
Exactly. Protect them from information that could be damaging to the government. Yeah, exactly. And so I think really the way that, and I want to just do a digression here, I think the way that we get rid of this is the way that they're doing it gradually in New Hampshire. First, you stop the judges from having the power to punish people for telling others what the true law is. And then you have a situation where gradually you get back to where this country was originally founded, and that was the judges giving instructions to the jurors, telling them that they should judge not only the facts of the case, but the law itself and how that law is being applied, if it's going to be cruel and unusual or excessive punishment like it was in your son's case. That had a political dimension to it as well, didn't it?
Yeah, I really come to believe that because of these lower sentences, this grotesque disparity between these sentences and what Ross got. And the judge referenced it in the sentencing. She referenced the libertarian philosophy of Silk Road. She quoted DPR as saying, the government was the enemy, and she said that's troubling and dangerous. And she was making him an example of someone who said that. And, as far as I'm concerned, she's troubling and dangerous because political speech, well, first of all, she's supposed to be defending the First Amendment. But, it's sacrosanct in this country. If you can't feel safe saying the government's the enemy and can be thrown in prison for it or amplify a sentence because of it, that's scary.
Yes, it is. And we've seen that with conservatives as well being the target of the MIAC report and the Fusion Center saying they're going to come after Ron Paul supporters. And that's precisely why they gave your son a double life sentence. This has been very taxing on you personally. I saw that you had a heart attack back in October. So sorry to hear that. How is your son doing in prison?
Well, Ross is just intentionally positive and trying to be a good influence. He's leading GED classes. There were 100 letters submitted to the judge on testifying to his character from people who knew him, and 4 of those were inmates, fellow inmates, saying how much Ross had contributed to them.
That's great.
So he's trying to stay positive. It's daunting.
Yes.
And but he's handling it as well as I can imagine anyone handling it.
And of course, you're appealing this, and tell us how people can help with this appeal, because you're fighting the full force and weight of the federal government that can just print money at will.
Yeah.
And you can't print money at will.
Darn.
Okay.
It was the appeal, which is a very, it's twice as long as a normal appeal. And the lawyer said they could have put in more. There's so many violations in that trial, the pre-trial, and the sentencing. But it was filed in January, and now we go through the whole procedure of an appeal. And it's very important document, not only for Ross, but to protect our constitutional rights, right to due process. The trial was blatantly unfair. And of course, if we don't have fair trials, we are not free.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, of course, as we touched on the issues of the investigating agents who were acting criminally and who had control of the website and who could make this look any way that they wished, because they could steal money, they could put documents in other people's names, and that information was suppressed. But as we're looking at this whole situation, they focused for sensationalism on the fact that on this website, this dark website, and I want you to tell the people a little bit about how Silk Road operated, that using Bitcoin and using Tor, the dark side of the internet, that people could buy and sell anything freely. And that was, of course, part of the philosophy, the libertarian philosophy, that the government shouldn't tell us what we can buy or sell. And of course, that's what the Constitution does. We had to have a constitutional amendment to prohibit alcohol. And unless they have the explicit power, the 9th and 10th Amendment says they don't have the power to prevent us from buying or selling anything. But that was his political philosophy. He was singled out and targeted in the sentencing structure for that. As you pointed out, the people who were selling drugs only got 10 years, 5 years. The agents got 5. He got 2 life sentences. But let's talk about the broader constitutional issues here, like the general warrant. Tell people about that.
Okay. And real quick, Silk Road itself did not allow everything. Child porn wasn't on there, assassinations, things that hurt people, and they're in the estimation of Silk Road. So there were some restrictions, but it was intended to be a free market website in general. Ross is a Ron Paul supporter. He's a libertarian. So that was the philosophy. As far as the laptop, the search and seizure of the laptop was unconstitutional. And it's a huge question for the digital age. And in fact, EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation, has joined with National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers saying this search and seizure is unconstitutional because they used a general warrant, which isn't, warrants require particularity under the 4th Amendment. They have to say, I'm looking for this particular file. They can't go in through your file cabinet, rummage through and see what they can find or your house. And this was one of the things that sparked the Revolutionary War.
Exactly. And it's what we're fighting with the NSA, is the general warrant issue. And of course, if you go back and you look at what started all this, if we go all the way back to the Church Committee hearings, the Pike Committee hearings, they looked at the CIA's assassination, but the Pike Committee hearings in the House looked at the NSA. And they said, you are looking at people's phones. We're going to prevent that by creating FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Okay, they've used FISA to create a star chamber court that gives them general warrants over not only our phones now, but because our phones are holding most of the information about our personal lives, they're using that to get into our personal life and to track us. And it's going to get far worse as we go to self-driving cars and an infrastructure where our cars are constantly in communication with the highway itself and the government that's monitoring that. They're going to be able to track and control our movements through this, just like they're able to look at every aspect of our lives by going into our phones. They've completely turned this upside down.
Well, that's why it's so important to uphold the 4th Amendment, and why it's so important for this appeal to push back, because we don't have these they're trying to take away these protections. They've made that very clear that, they said if it's digital, it's not protected. And we're going into the digital age.
Yeah.
Very important, principles involved here.
When, of course, there wasn't anything about digital communications in the 4th Amendment.
Those founding fathers forgot that part.
Exactly. So they're using that to say, well, this isn't papers. But the point is, they were laying out everything that was informational, everything that defined your life. And so they're laying out a principle in the 4th Amendment. But they've created all these legal fictions, like saying we're getting a PIN register that they did.
That's in the appeal too.
Yeah. So they've created all these different legal fictions to circumvent the principles of the 4th Amendment.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah,
and also the use of digital evidence in the trial. It was there was not one actual live person who said they saw Ross do anything. It was all digital evidence. And as we, a mortgage company won't accept a screenshot of a bank statement. Digital evidence is known to be vulnerable, easily manipulated, easily planted.
Yeah.
And of course, the agents, could do that too, that we talked about.
And that's one of the things that concerns us in the digital age.
Yes.
Is that because after we set up the expectation of the public that they can look at everything on our phones,
right.
Then if the government comes in and says, look what I found on their phone, even if they didn't find it on your phone, then the public is going to believe that because they believe they have total, complete access to everything that you have. So anything the government produces, even though it's an electronic form, even though it could have been manufactured by the government, the public is going to be more accepting of that. That's the thing I find truly dangerous about all this, is that the public is accepting the fact that that you can accept digital information. You don't have to have something, as you point out, somebody actually seeing you do something. It can all be in digital form. That is very frightening.
It is. It doesn't take much to create these things. It's child's play is what I've been told.
Well, tell us now again where this is in terms of your process of appeal. I know that there was something at the beginning of the year. Where is it right now?
Now, these amicus briefs have been filed. There was another amicus brief, LEAP, that you referenced, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, joined the Drug Policy Alliance, and a former federal judge, Nancy Gertner, and Just Leadership USA. They got together and submitted an amicus brief about the sentencing. And then I mentioned the other amicus brief about the laptop. And all of those are now part of the appeal. And now the federal government has until June 17th to rebut. And then what happens after that is the defense gets to respond. And then it goes through, I don't know exactly, every step in sequence, but then the appeal court looks at it. And
give us the website again where people can.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. freeross.org. We really need help. I mean, and if you could see it as a bigger picture. Yeah. These are big principles.
Yes.
And it's a way to, if you're against the drug war, or if you can see the evils of the drug war, or you want to protect the Constitution through a case, this is a great opportunity to do that. And, we're just one family. We're just trying to survive while we get grassroots support and, of course, our own finances, which are getting smaller and smaller, to take a stand.
Yes. Well, of course, as you pointed out, you've got a lot of different organizations that have come together on this because they used his political affiliations to really stick it to him on this double life sentence, far more than they gave the drug sellers. So this is way beyond the involvement of drugs, and as well as the way they've used the general warrant to say that they only have digital evidence on this and they're going to use that. So these are a lot of very fundamental principles that affect all of us on a wide variety of issues, and we need to wake up and see how our legal system is being completely destroyed and papered over by these actions of the government in this. This is just one more example of how they are destroying our legal system. And of course, always coming in and using the war on drugs or using the war on terror as a justification, because we have to be safe and we have to be sober. And they're not doing very well on either one of those fronts. The tactic is failing to do anything other than to create a police state. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for
having me. And we do hope that things are ironed out in this, for not just for your sake, but for our sake as well. We all want to live in a country that is ruled by law and not by politics and not by thugs and a police state. That's it for tonight's broadcast. Join us again tomorrow at 7 Central, 8 p.m. Eastern for the Nightly News.
My fellow InfoWarriors, I am very excited to be able to announce to you the introduction at InfoWarsLife.com of a new way to save time and money when you stock up on InfoWars Life formulations like Survival Shield X2 and Super Male Vitality. Just go to InfoWarsLife.com today, select your favorite product, click on Auto Ship before adding to cart, and choose how often you want us to send you another order. Every time you choose Auto Ship at InfoWarsLife.com, you get 10% off and you you won't have to worry about running out and having to reorder next time. And of course, you can cancel with one click anytime. As you know, I'm all about the idea of a 360 win, and the new auto ship feature at InfoWarsLife.com is a sure win for everybody. A win for liberty, a win for health, and a win when it comes to big savings. Visit InfoWarsLife.com today and save 10% on your next InfoWars Life order by selecting auto ship at checkout. That's InfoWarsLife.com or call 888-253-3139.